What was Palestine then? Palestine was then the area between the Mediterranean and the Iraqi border.
You say there was no such thing as
East
Palestinian?
and West Bank, no. East and West Bank was Palestine. I'm a Palestinian. From 21 until 48, I carried a Palestinian passport. There was no such thing in this area as Jews and Arabs and Palestinians.
The mysterious origins of the Palestinian people. Who were they and where did they come from? Are they ancient people or a more recent group? The answers have just been revealed with DNA analysis of Bronze Age Palestinians. When the results were released, the DNA showed a history no one expected. One of cities older than Jerusalem, Canaanite builders, Amorite wanderers, and Philistine invaders. So who are the people we now call Palestinians? Let's get right into all the evidence. Canaanites and Bronze Age origins. In a recent ancient DNA research published in Nature Genetics, scientists extracted DNA from Bronze Age skeletons found in places like Megiddo, Sidon, and other Levantine cities. When they compared this ancient DNA to samples from modern Palestinians, they noticed a surprising overlap of over 90% continuity. This means the people living in Palestine today are not newcomers or recently formed groups at all. They are direct descendants of the Canaanites, Jebusites, and other ancient communities who once built the region's first cities, farmed the land, and laid the foundations for much of the culture that started to exist after. As trade routes opened up and ships from Cyprus, Crete, and Egypt began docking at coastal cities like Gaza and Ashkelon, the genes of Palestine started to change. Besides bringing goods, traders also brought their own customs and genes. But even as these new people arrived, the major population was still surprisingly stable. The genes of the Canaanites in particular stayed strong, but the history doesn't end with the Canaanites. Those thousands of years ago, the seaside cities of Gaza and Ashkelon continued to be busy, noisy places where people from all over the ancient world came to trade, settle, and sometimes even fight. One of the most talked about groups from that time was the Philistines. For a long time, we only knew them from old stories in the Bible, but then something changed that surface knowledge. Archaeologists dug up real Philistine skeletons in Ascalon, and scientists tested their DNA. They found that the Philistines had roots in southern Europe and the Aegean, places like Greece or Crete, so they weren't originally from the Middle East at all. They were part of the migrants that came by sea, settled along the coast, and blended in over time. While the word Philistine sounds a lot like Palestinian, modern Palestinians aren't mostly descended from the Philistines. Their DNA is a lot older and more connected to local groups like the Canaanites. The Philistines were just one part of the history and weren't always in Palestine. At the same time, another group called the Amorites was moving in on land from what's now Syria, and they brought with them their Semitic languages and traditions. These Amorites married into local families, raised their children, and slowly became part of the Levant's growing mix of people. Their DNA also shows up in modern Palestinians, making it more diverse. But who were the Israelites in all of this history? Were they strangers or locals? The Israelites and ancient Hebrews. The old story that the Israelites came from somewhere far away and took over the land isn't actually true. Ancient DNA, especially from Iron Age sites like Megiddo and Abel Beth Makkah, now shows that the people we call ancient Israelites were not newcomers. They were mostly local Canaanites who slowly developed new traditions, laws, and beliefs, which eventually became the foundations of the Hebrew religion. In other words, they grew out of the land itself after they arrived. And here's where it gets a lot more interesting. When scientists compared the DNA of modern Palestinians to that of the Iron Age Israelites, they found a bigger overlap. The genes match. Modern Palestinians, especially those in rural villages, still carry many of those same ancient genetic traits. So even though today they may speak Arabic and practice Islam or Christianity, their blood ties go way back to the people who once built Jerusalem and worshipped at the first temple. Now compare that to Ashkenazi Jews, many of whom trace their ancestry through Europe after centuries of exile and migration. Their DNA has a completely different history. While they still carry ancient Levantine genes, they also show strong European influence, especially from places like Italy, Germany, and Eastern Europe. Mizrahi Jews who stayed in the Middle East share much more DNA with Palestinians than with their Ashkenazi relatives. This doesn't erase anyone's heritage, but it does show that the old bloodlines of the land didn't disappear. They stayed, quietly passed down from parent to child, even as empires rose and fell, and languages changed. So when people say Palestinians are outsiders in the land of Israel, science has told the actual truth. Many Palestinians are not only native, they're the living descendants of the same people the land's oldest stories were written about. But if that's the case, if the DNA of ancient Israelites is still so present in Palestinians, what really happened when the Arabs came in the 600s? Did the people change, or was it just their culture and religion? The Arabization of the Levant. Well, when Arab Muslim armies arrived in the 7th century, they brought major changes but not a new population. There was no mass replacement of people. Instead, what happened was cultural and gradual. Arabic became the new common language, and Islam slowly spread across the region. But the people themselves, the farmers, the merchants, the families living in the hills and valleys, mostly stayed right where they were. Genetic studies, especially those comparing ancient and modern DNA, show that the Levantine gene was the same through it all. In fact, when scientists studied rural Palestinian communities, they found a high level of continuity with Bronze and Iron Age DNA from the region. This means that while people in Palestine may now speak Arabic and follow Islamic traditions, their ancestors have been there for thousands of years, long before the Arabic language ever existed. Even more surprising is what recent DNA evidence reveals about the people of ancient Judah. Samples taken from Judean-era sites like Lachish and other Iron Age towns show genes that still survive today in the DNA of rural Palestinians. This challenges one historical assumption that the Romans fully exiled the Jewish population. In reality, many Judeans stayed behind, especially outside the cities. Over the centuries, they adapted. Some became Christians under Byzantine rule, and later many converted to Islam, joining the Arabized population, but their bloodlines didn't just vanish. Ironically, this means that Palestinians may have preserved the ancient Judean genome more clearly than many Jewish communities that later settled in Europe or North Africa and mixed with other populations. But this history goes even further. If Palestinians and Jews share such deep roots, what does the DNA say about the whole region of Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Samaritans? DNA links between Palestinians, Jews, and other Levantines. Whether they're Muslim, Christian, Samaritan, or Jewish, people from the Levant have many of the same ancient genes. Scientists like Haber and Lazaridis studied both the male line's Y-DNA and female line's mtDNA and found strong overlaps in groups living across the region today. Haplogroups like J1 and J2 for men and HV or N1 for women show up again and again in Palestinians, Jews, and other Levantine populations. Even Palestinians who now live in other parts of the world due to war or exile still have these ancient Levantine genetic markers. That's where smaller, lesser-known groups are involved too. Take the Samaritans, for example. This small community living around Nablus today claims descent from the tribes of northern Israel. And DNA backs up that story. Because they've married within their group for generations, their genes show rare, almost untouched genetic markers of ancient Levantine DNA. Then there are Palestinian Christians whose families may have followed Jesus when he walked those same hills and who have kept their faith and their genetic ties to the land alive for nearly 2,000 years. Regardless of where they are now, all these roots trace back to one name, Palestine. But is that name really ancient, or is it just a modern invention? Despite the rumors, the name Palestine goes way back. The Greek historian Herodotus was already using the word Pal in the 5th century BCE, long before modern politics entered the picture. Later, after the Jewish revolt against Rome in the 2nd century CE, the Romans renamed Judea as Syria Palestina. They wanted to remove the identity of the rebelling Judeans from existence, not the Jewish people themselves, but to ruin their political unity. While they were at it, the name stuck. It stayed through the Christian Byzantine era, through the arrival of Islam, the Crusades, the Ottomans, and into British maps during colonial times. Today, it's one of the oldest regional names we still use for the people native to the land. If you enjoyed this exploration of the true mysterious origins of the Palestinian people, then hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on more ancient history and recent impressive DNA analyses on these ancient people, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next videos.